Good morning, everyone. My name is Josh Gillen, one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. In the 80s, we had Saturday morning cartoons. Now we're doing Get Vocal to talk about Hawkeye, which kind of follows that tradition fairly nicely. With me is Stephen Tolafield and Gabby Martin. How you both doing?
Do I'm excited. I had reservations because we've had good Marvel shows. We've had Marvel shows, see, but I am hyped so far for Hawkeye. I'm really hyped. I think it's hitting every beat. It's getting there, and of course the teasers that we're getting. I mean, I don't know about you, but I am so ready to see Uncle. Like I'm just like dying, waiting in my seat. I need that episode. I know who it is, and it needs to get here. Like I need it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Uh, Stephen, how about you?
I missed the 2012 comic book run of this story, and so it's totally new to me, and I am really enjoying it. It's super fun, and Kate Bishop is such a great character. And as we'll talk about, a lot of these little legal issues and a lot of the story points have a lot of intersections with my background, so I've been really engaged and really excited about it. So yeah, it's fun. I'm loving it. How about you, Josh?
I, I love it. So this is one of the best Marvel shows. The fact it's telling a small story, it's an
Mhm.
intimate story. It's not I mean, Falcon Winter Soldier was, let's do something global. It's like,
Yeah.
WandaVision was intimate,
Yeah.
but also big in
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah.
This is what Falcon and Winter Soldier should have been. It's just
Mm,
Yeah.
telling a very, two people, great character development.
yeah.
Uh, they are doing a great job with Clint Barton and Kate Bishop, and the interplay between Renner and Steinfeld is fantastic.
Yeah. They have great chemistry.
The dog is outstanding. I just want to hug it. And
Pizza Dog is the best. I love him. And I love that it's one of my favorite things is New York in the holidays. And the fact that it's just capturing that both like the really beautiful lights, but also kind of like slushy New York experience. That it really captures both of those things, and it's so atmospheric. And I think they're doing a great job with it. It's awesome.
I think this is the first MCU Christmas story. So
Mhm.
there's that.
Wow. Yeah.
It's just working.
Yeah.
Some stories work well for the short storytelling model.
Yeah.
This is one of them. We've never had this much about Hawkeye, oh,
Right.
both of them,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's working great.
Yeah.
And it's, uh, just the little Easter eggs for Wilson Fisk. It's like, uh,
All the units coming back together, and I am so excited. Like I am hyped for this. I am hyped for Spider-Man: No Way Home. Like everything is coming together, and it is such a good time to be a Marvel fan. Like just it is our time. It is our time.
well, yes, it is. And speaking of our time, let's talk about I Can Do This All Day. The having a that musical number, it totally makes sense. There would be a Broadway musical about the Avengers that is thinking about human nature, and that you live in this world where it's 2023, so it's Christmas 2023,
Hmm.
and as far as the world knows, Tony died heroically, Black Widow died very heroically, and they think Captain America died very heroically. So naturally, there would be a musical, and there would be biographies on all of these characters in this fictional world. So producing a musical raises all kinds of issues because you have living people, and like they couldn't just do a Legal Geeks musical without talking to us first. Like there would have to be some sign offs. I want input on who's going to play me. I'm sure you both feel the same.
Right.
I can provide a short list, but the fact of the matter is, there are some issues with that. And Stephen, I hit this hard in the outline. Can you walk us through the issues of doing Rogers the musical?
Right. So the thing is that, like, again, full disclosure, like could not hit more of my buttons. Like it's a geek centric IP. We're talking about the law, and I'm a theater kid. My bachelor's is in theater and dance. So this is like I could literally do this all day. Like I love this show. I love the musical number. The Mark Scheinman lyrics and music are amazing. It just cracked me up and was so spot on. Um, but as you said, Josh, this talking about real people in a artistic work implicates the depicted individual's right of publicity, which is a right that's governed by state law, and it allows people to preserve the right to control the commercial use of their image, voice, and like life story, and generally. I mean, this right kind of prevents others only from the unauthorized commercial use of the person's image. And commercial use tends to be actually pretty narrowly defined because it's limited to like advertising, merchandise, doing impersonations for commercial use, like Elvis impersonators. They either have talked to the estate of Elvis or they're just in great legal peril, or like implied endorsements for products. And of course, the right of publicity is a kind of a property right, so it's transferable by contract or license and so forth. But the thing that I learned about looking into this is that the right of publicity is also kind of balanced against the First Amendment rights of artists to tell stories about actual events. So usually the right of publicity doesn't prevent the expressive use of real people in novels, movies, plays, or musicals, even if those expressive uses are commercially sold. So it's just that the expressive work has to be transformative. So in other words, the artist has to kind of layer in their own artistic interpretation to transform the real person's personality into something new. So this expressive use was illustrated as I was looking into it in this big litigation that happened by the family of Billy Tyne, who was portrayed by George Clooney in The Perfect Storm. The family sued Time Warner for the unauthorized use of their names for commercial purposes. But although the film grossed like $150 million, the Florida Supreme Court held that the film was expressive use and not commercial. So the film had not misappropriated the family members' rights of publicity. So I'm not an IP expert. So feel free to like correct me if my take on this is wrong. But when it comes to the living Avengers depicted in Rogers the Musical, the fact that they're singing and dancing strikes me as possibly a sufficiently transformative use to implicate the First Amendment protections of the expressive work. And also keep in mind that in the fictional world of the Avengers, these were newsworthy matters of public interest. So that sort of other angle would probably implicate the First Amendment protections of the producers to tell the stories of real events that actually happened. So they could probably use like the identities of Clint and Scott Lang and Bruce Banner and Thor, although whether a god has sort of like a right of publicity, it might be kind of questionable, but they might be able to get away with using their personalities without explicit consent. But in any event, it seems likely from the way the story was told that the producers prudently involved the Living Avengers in the production and got their authorization to use their likenesses, as Clint he's there on opening night and he looks kind of embarrassed and kind of dismayed by their depiction, but it doesn't seem like it's a surprise. So hopefully he was kind of in on it and had sort of consented to the use. But those are the living Avengers. The flip side is that there's different and potentially different protections for the right of publicity for people who are deceased. So like the Avengers who weren't alive, like you said, like Natasha Romanoff and Tony Stark. And interestingly, New York State just this summer enacted a new right of publicity statute into the New York Civil Rights Law, Section 50F, which for the first time codified the right to publicity for deceased personalities and performers. Both California and New York have pretty intricate right to publicity law, given the number of celebrities and public figures that live in those jurisdictions. But up until this year, New York didn't protect the right of publicity for deceased personalities or public figures. And it was becoming a problem because of the development of like deepfake technology that allowed people to create realistic likenesses of people who are no longer living for commercial purposes. So civil rights law section 50F creates a right of publicity for deceased performers and personalities. But again, the statute explicitly accepts works that implicate First Amendment expression rights if the work is a play, book, magazine, newspaper, or other literary work. So I don't know, Rogers the Musical might be okay actually to use Nat and Tony's likenesses without violating their section 50F right of publicity.
I agree, even though I would be very careful going up against the estate of a billionaire.
Yeah, exactly.
Because his widow might have a thing or two to say about that.
Right.
And a god.
Right.
So that until recently had been living in Norway. So like there's some issues with that. It reminds me of between my first and second year in law school, I entered in the California State Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was a soda company. It might have been Brisk. I'm not positive. I don't remember for sure, but they did a ad campaign with claymation figures of deceased famous people.
Right.
And the family members of those individuals were not happy to see deceased husbands or grandpa, in claymation, promoting a soda.
Right.
And legislation was passed because they were super upset about that. So California's had it for over 20 years.
Yeah.
But again, it's not like using Tony Stark to promote an energy drink.
Right. Exactly.
So it's the Battle of New York, which the world learned there were aliens. Like it was a big day. People learned about SHIELD publicly, with the unauthorized use of a nuclear weapon not ordered by the President of the United States be fired on an American citizen or city, like things like that.
Right.
People would notice. Gabby, your takes on the musical number. If you break into song too, that's totally fine.
Yeah, no, I think to Stephen's point, I think it's sufficiently derivative and interpretive. You see that their costumes aren't like they didn't like do some high quality cosplay. They like Thor's in a t-shirt and a vest. Was like that was really weird. It was a very low-key. Wasn't there, like, and that's an interesting kind of myth because he was there in the time heist. Scott Wing was there, but wasn't there the actual Battle of New York, which is what they're depicting. He was there in Avengers Tower to get Loki, so maybe somebody saw him there, but he wasn't actually fighting. So there's these kind of liberties that they've taken the actual events. And of course, there's some humor, obviously about Thor and Captain America. What I find interesting is you see productions on Broadway and specifically off Broadway of, unauthorized, right? There's a production right now of unauthorized musical of The Office, right? Like they do not have permission to do that, but it's very clear that they do not have permission to do that. And so, but the look of this, the way, you see all this advertisement throughout the episodes of Rogers the Musical, leads me to believe they have some kind of. Also, I want to know, they have to have to understand that I can do this all day was Cap's phrase. But who said that to? He said to himself when he was away. He said that to Bucky, and he said to Tony. So, like, there are not people that have heard this phrase of his, I can do this all day. So they would have to know that and have worked with likely the Stark estate or other kind of Avengers. I can see Scott Lang being like the super fanboy producing this, you know, kind of working, being their inside source. So yeah, they'd have to get a lot of that information to kind of have the inside scoop. And I can see Scott Lang's their source. Why he's in the Battle of New York, like put me in there as an Avenger. So yeah, it was a very interesting take. And I love the advertisements. That's so New York to see like hit, you know, play. Like when I remember I went to New York when Hamilton was like at peak, and you could not escape like the visual in New York. Like it was everywhere, and I think that's very, you know, with all the slushiness and all of that, with all the advertisements, I thought was really on point.
That's why I think there had to have been a biography on Steve Rogers.
Right.
That after everything that he did, and possibly after the snap, that, you know, there probably were interviews, there probably were people who, you know, either he recounted his story or Bucky did. I mean, if Bucky wrote the musical, that would be a shit. Love letter friend. So, I mean, he did read The Hobbit.
That's true.
It's
But I think
possible.
it's interesting what we're seeing in the MCU, just from a kind of, you know, story perspective, is it happens, I mean, chronologically, like 10 years, right? This is a decade of MCU storytelling. Now we are seeing kind of the hero work. We started seeing it in Far From Home with the depictions of Iron Man, right? Like the Iron Man mural, people around, and we're starting to see kind of legacy that left, which is interesting because that's a huge point in Hamilton. But you know, the legacy that these heroes have left, and you see it with Iron Man. Now you're seeing it with Captain America, and you see it in this Rogers the Musical. We're also going to see it, remember, in No Way Home. They are rebranding the Statue of Liberty with the Cap shield in No Way Home. Like that is kind of how significant these heroes are. It's interesting to me that we're not really seeing that with the kind of everyday heroes of Clint Barton and Natasha Romanoff. That they're the not superpowered Avengers, right? And we see their kind of hero arc, their hero worship. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, how that plays out in Hawkeye and his branding, right? That's the whole conversation.
Well, Black Widow cosplayer at the play that waved to Clint. So again, the super attractive redhead, the red hair is part of her branding, and being able to do a cartwheel like that, like that would mean, yeah, it's like strong colors, strong brand right there. You also have Captain America just being very iconic, and you get the World War II hero who's saved the country, saved the world multiple times now. So yeah, it would make sense that there's hero worship. And Tony gave the, you know, death blow to Thanos and brought back half the universe. So yeah, it makes sense there are murals of him going up places. But I wonder if it's comparable to, like, you know, 10 years after World War II with, you know, hero worship of, you know, Medal of Honor winners and others from, you know, whether from whatever. I mean, there were a lot of heroic battles in World War II that people felt very strongly about because their lives were saved and sacrifices made. So, I mean, it makes sense that you would have something that iconic take place.
Yeah.
Well,
And again, something you said about the costumes too. I'm just throwing it out there to anyone who sees this or anyone on the call. Like, if someone wants to get together a group SDCC costume for the cast of Rogers the Musical, I am in, because that would be a great group cosplay because it's so easy. Like the costumes are so movement and stage friendly. Like that would be amazing, and you could just like go around posing. Like, it'd be so awesome.
we have to learn the lyrics, but yeah, like that.
Or we could just project. We could like have an audio recording. Anyway, anyone who's interested, hit me up.
It requires singing, Stephen. Like you would have to learn all the lyrics. You got to go full on with that.
I'm pretty close.
Dance move, everything. Like just randomly break out into song and dance everywhere. At Comic-Con. That's how it goes.
I got Cap Shield if you want to borrow it. So, so that's the opening of the show, and in with that, we then see Kate at school doing a dare to ring the bell by shooting a trick arrow at it, which leads to the destruction of the bell tower, clock tower, that apparently one of her ancestors funded and built at that school. So the family's going to pay. Does this fall under the world of negligence, recklessness, or just maybe strict liability for an ultra hazardous activity? Gabby, do you want to take a swing at this bad boy?
I think what you have to consider is because she's fine, as Clint says. So I think there may be school policies that would factor into it, some consequences. So there would be a liability to the school. And as far as I think that would be an intersection of where like what she's classified at school as. She'd obviously maybe face some criminal liability, definitely some civil liability from school. Although I don't know if they'd sue her if mom's writing a check and just like disappear. So that's kind of it remains to be seen.
I like having the uber rich family just write a check and make it go away. There are stories of the rich kid at the golf at the club driving a golf cart into a pool, and like daddy writes a check to make that stupid thing go away. Family would end with criminal charges for a mere mortal. So definitely, yeah. Stephen, your thoughts on ringing the bell?
I'd agree with Gabby. I think she didn't intend to cause the property damage. She just intended to kind of show off. So I don't know. So definitely recklessness, probably some sort of criminal property damage. It also occurred to me too that if this is a really historic building, there might be additional sort of penalties layered in. If it's a historical on a historical register somewhere, there might be sort of additional protections for causing the collapse of a historical bell tower. It seems pretty bad. I think even in the show, she's like, yeah, that's bad. Like, so she fully appreciates. But as you say, like sort of the privilege of sort of very wealthy people to sort of cover property damage caused by errant youth is probably going to protect her some amount for sure.
Get out the credit card. That you also light breaking and entering as well, because she does pick the lock to go into a place that's closed where she isn't supposed to be, and her friends quickly abandon her. So there's that. Not so trying to impress people who left her.
Right.
Back to the Battle of New York, and we see the penthouse bishop Chitare attack. Would property insurance cover that? Because there can be exclusions for war and terrorism. This took place in 2012, so it's definitely post 9/11. So it recognizes that, but we speak to an attack. That was a war, but not by one on Earth. this? Who wants to jump in on that?
I feel like coming from the insurance capital of the world. And I actually took, and this kind of brought me back to my insurance class in law school. And it's interesting, with policy, it may depend, like Travelers may cover it, but the Hartford may not, depend on your insurance, what your insurance policy looks like. Especially, we learned that building has been around for a very long time. So there, she says her great grandmother built the property. It may, they're going back to the historical things, there may be some historical, extra coverage based on its historical value. But I think would be interesting to see in the SCU universe that insurance policies evolve as things happen to exclude coverage. So you have this first event with alien invasions. I'm sure that what was 2012, by 2013, insurance policies were specifically excluding any kind of maybe not just alien attacks, but also any damage related to Avengers or superheroes. That kind of, I can see a phrase of like incidental damage or accidental damage from Avengers activities being excluded, and that you'd have to buy a whole separate policy for in a big city. So like, we have in Florida, insurance is separate, but if you live on the coast, you need flood insurance. Like, it is, you are putting your home and yourself at risk to flood insurance. So I would imagine people in New York would be buying whatever superhero disaster coverage. And, maybe other places, California, have their own type of coverage after Sokovia, that your entire country gets destroyed. So it would be interesting to see how the insurance policies develop. It would become very intricate, as we've seen with cyber law, cyber insurance evolve as cyber attacks get more and more intricate and complex. Cyber insurance develops to address that and kind of take in the risk that people are facing, and obviously insurance is all about risk assessment and risk management, so spreading the risk, and people like in New York would probably face higher premiums than people in, I don't know, Wisconsin. Managers don't seem to be doing a lot of damage. But for people who faced policy damage with the Battle of New York, they would likely have to go, the policies weren't clear, like provisions saying that they were excluding war. People may have to go to court and challenge and get the courts to interpret the policies to include damage from New York, which here in Connecticut, and the Connecticut Supreme Court found for the insurers, finding that there was a term that collapse was not defined. And so the courts found that the policies didn't cover it. So what the kind of interesting give and take with courts is that laws to address where the gaps in insurance are. So after the Battle of New York, if you had a lot of courts finding that homeowners insurance didn't cover kind of disaster kind of events, and you would have kind of plaintiffs arguing that, like, who can anticipate these threats from other worlds And you would probably have an argument that like it seems like it's going to continue. It's not something that you can anticipate that it's always going to be this way. You know, we don't know what threat the Avengers are going to face. It could be greater. I mean, nobody in 2012 would have predicted Thanos, although Thanos was responsible for the battle of New York. They didn't know that. You know, so nobody could have predicted Sokovia in the battle of New York. So like those kinds of arguments would be made, and it would really be upon lawmakers to say, let's put in, you know, we have the Sokovia Accords, let's put in laws to kind of address these issues that people are facing so that when property is damaged, but yeah,
I would bet dollars to donuts that after the Battle of New York, FEMA was shelling out money to do repairs as well. But you know, you could see the situation like with Hurricane Katrina, where you know the levee breaks and the lower Ninth Ward and St. Bernard precinct get flooded, and there's you know the argument of did that happen? Was the flood because of the storm or because of the levee break? And that then would determine if coverage applied or not. And like that got messy and ugly fast. And in some situations, it's probably best just for the federal government to shell out money so the insurance companies don't go bankrupt. And kind of we're doing a bailout before the bailout's needed, and just to fix homes and restore people to what they lost. Because like that's kind of the purpose of government. It's like, well, we didn't know this alien attack was going to happen. New York was the beachhead. You know, we'll fix it, and now we'll have rely upon how do we keep people safe. Stephen, anything to add?
Not a huge insurance expert, but I will say that and Gabby's analysis sounds exactly right. The only thing I'll add is that when I was watching that first scene, I thought that we were going to have a negligent infliction of emotional distress issue, because there was sort of like Kate came down the steps and saw that the kitchen was gone, and she was sort of looking for her dad, and so I thought that there was going to be this whole like California law only permits negligent infliction of emotional distress for family members if you perceive their injury. But then he's okay. So I was interested in that. But it seems like
okay, or does he get like kicked off very mysteriously?
well, okay, in like Marvel universe.
Yeah.
Not use that excuse to off dad really quick.
Right, that's true.
He wasn't wearing a red shirt, and it wasn't a mom killed. So, you know,
Right.
but we do have some of the Disney themes going here. Let's hit the underground auction. One of you did a lot of notes on this. Who wants to take lead?
That was me. Yeah, I think there would, I mean, obviously, underground auctions, we see this in movies and TV all the time. But what I find really interesting, normally you see like in Wonder Woman 1984, where you're seeing kind of stolen goods, and you actually see that at the beginning of the auction with the dinosaur skull, where you see kind of exotic goods or kind of illegal goods being auctioned. But here you see stolen property being auctioned, and what I find interesting is they reference later when Hawkeye is talking to Kate about what else she noticed, what they were after at the auction, because obviously, the Roman suit was the kind of focus, but what they were after was that watch, which obviously has the gold and red coloring of Iron Man. It has nanotech in it. Maybe it has, it's a suit design of very that kind of watch gauntlets. before, so it's not kind of unheard of. But you have these stolen goods. So they were going into the Avengers compound, right after the battle with Thanos and stealing stuff. I would imagine that the Ronin suit was there. That's where they got it from. Because I think they do mention that they took it from the Avengers compound. Why nobody put it together that obviously the Ronin was one of the Avengers, I don't know. People are stupid. But yeah, so there would be liability both for whoever was doing the stealing. Larceny, obviously, larceny is the unlawful taking and carrying away of others' property without consent of the owner. Clearly, they didn't have it. And the intent to deprive. They are intending to deprive and make money off of what they stole. Also, the liability for the auctioneer, because the auctioneer clearly knows that these are stolen items. So who the auctioneer, whoever was organizing the auction of these stolen goods. So both there would be criminal liability for obviously larceny, just liability. I mean, like Pony's estate could sue them for taking items from the Avengers compound. So definitely different aspects of liability to that auction. Although I don't know if Clint's going to be suing anybody for taking the Ronin suit and outing himself as the true owner of the Ronin suit. Cover.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, because there are cases, and I think with dinosaur bones that were illegally bought and like displayed in homes. It's like there are a whole bunch of laws that you can't just take a dinosaur skull from China and sneak it into the United States. There's, for someone to put into their great room, like, not okay. Like the whole list of wrong with that. Stephen, have any other topics to add to the underground auction issue?
Yeah, it also just struck me that the potential criminal or civil liability for the purchasers too, because you can't say that, oh, the other person stole it and I'm just buying it for myself. That sort of liability attaches to people who are responsible for knowing where the stolen goods come from. And it just reminds me of there's so much litigation and a lot of legislation that passed kind of 20 years ago about sort of looted art that was misappropriated by Nazis from Jewish households during the World War II, and sort of the purchasers, and who were often like museums and stuff, just had no idea the provenance of the artwork, and these pieces that were stolen wound up on museum walls all over the world and in private collections. So I know California has statutes that are specifically sort of extend statutes of limitations to recover sort of stolen property like that. So just the people who are purchasing that are also probably pretty hot legal water.
The underground illegal auction and say like, oh, I didn't know it was my bad. Like, yeah, it was, because you were at an underground illegal auction to buy things you should not have been buying. So yeah, and with the auctioneer joking about it's for home display only. So wink, yeah. Now let's talk about Pizza Dog. There's two parts of this. First, saving Pizza Dog, and then finding Pizza Dog's owner. There's something called the necessity defense, where you break a law in order to prevent a greater harm. And Kate does some jaywalking and bounces off a windshield. And by jaywalking, I mean flipping and cartwheeling through the street to go save a dog. I think there's a good necessity defense. Yeah. I mean, she did break that guy's windshield when she landed on it. Luckily, the windshield broke her fall, but she did save the dog. And when you go, well, I saved a golden retriever, that's probably going to work with a jury. Just in the judge will go like, yeah, we're going to let that one slip, and probably the DA would go like, yeah, you saved the golden retriever. Okay, just don't do that again. But then you have the issue of finding the dog's owner, and one of you raised the issue of bailment. Who?
Right.
Take it.
Yeah. Yeah, so generally animals are regarded as the property of the owner. So lost animals may trigger property law duties and obligations on people who find that lost property or animal. As an aside, like I didn't really realize this property right has only really been around since the late 1800s. But at first, dogs were regarded as qualified property given their supposed limited utility to the owners when compared to sort of more useful livestock like cows and horses. And I came across this US Supreme Court case from 1897 that described dogs as having, quote, no intrinsic value. What the like so like the Supreme Court, like as far as I'm concerned, the pizza dog is worth like 12 Supreme Courts. Like, but yeah. So the law regards dogs as sort of like property. And so when a person finds and takes possession of lost property, the common law creates an implied bailment in the property. So as of episode 1, Kate Bishop is a gratuitous bailee of Pizza Dog. And this is like a contractual arrangement between Kate and Pizza Dog's owner. And Kate now owes a duty to take reasonable care of Pizza Dog and, if possible, return him to his true owner. Kind of question whether like feeding a dog a bunch of like cheese pizza is taking really good care of the dog, but at least he's not like wandering the streets of New York. And also, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It's like giving a dog chili. Who would do
Exactly. That's not taking good care. Yeah. So, and there is a kind of a question about whether he's been abandoned or whether he's just been lost. And if he's been abandoned, then the true owner has relinquished their property rights in the dog, and so Kate is the true owner now. But if he's just been lost, then Kate's property title is superior to everyone except the true owners. And as in most jurisdictions, the remedy in New York to recover lost personal property or chattels from a wrongful possessor is a replevin action. So if Pizza Dog is lost, then Kate might have to relinquish him if she's sued for replevin. But as with all equitable actions, the equitable defenses of things like latches or unclean hands would apply. And if I was representing Kate, I would just argue that the strong emotional bond between them and severing that would create more harm than restoring Pizza Dog to his true owner. So again, no spoilers because I don't know what happens with Pizza Dog. So and I'm really invested with the story. So keep in mind.
dog better not be a scroll, because that would just be like really horrible reaction.
Is there a dog equivalent of Flurkins? What's that? Oh, there should be.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to hide and seek episode 2. So there's LARPing. Gabby and I talked about going to Ren fairs and having to wear costumes, and this is kind of a kissing cousin to that. Stephen, can you walk us through the LARPing issues?
Yeah, the LARPing really made me happy. I love that sequence. First off, as an attorney, it made me really nervous that it wasn't obvious that Clint had signed an express contractual assumption of risk because all those like swords flailing around, like he certainly could be injured, and the LARPing company could be out a lot of money if he sued them and he didn't expressly assume the risk of that injury. Although he did sign something really quickly without reading it. There may have been sort of some release of liability and waiver of claims language in there. And just to note that if there was, he would be bound by that contract, regardless of whether he read or understood it, unless there was some sort of fraud or misrepresentation, which it didn't seem like there was in that interaction. But then the other thing too is it struck me is that the way that he and Grills sort of conspire to deceive the audience about the fight that they're going to have, so that Clint can recover the Ronin's costume from Grills, and it just made me think of the litigation against the NFL by attendees at Patriots games who sued Coach Belichick and the Patriots when there was the allegations or the discovery that the Patriots were videotaping the other team's signals and kind of cheating during the game. And a bunch of the sort of attendees and fans sued because they alleged that there was sort of contractual fraud, that they paid for tickets to watch a fair football game, and it turned out that the players and the coaches were cheating, and so that the attendees were defrauded from the benefit of their bargain. But yeah, it's the court held that there was no contractual sort of privity there for the attendees, but it just made me think of that sort of fraudulent deception of an audience.
This scene is so great because Renner can actually play the straight man and saying, I respect whatever the hell this is, and just trying to not lose it, or saying, I'm going to really punch you and you're going to really fall down and I will take it, which raises the issue of, was that contract that they entered under duress? Consideration is invalid because there was duress involved. So
It's like a crime, yeah.
Just, I just need to take it, God, dude. Why are you making me do all this? I want to get home to my family. So, Gabby, any other LARPing issues that you care to expand upon?
I think the biggest thing is that, those express contracts are the express contractual assumption. That's what you sign when you go to a gym, when you go rope climb or rock climbing, those types of things. Those are super legal. Even if you don't read it, like, you are signing away your ability to company. Usually what happens in the case of, say, rock climbing is you can't sue the gym if you fall and fall, but like the only kind of action could effective. But you really are signing away a lot of your rights. But the courts have held time and time again, those are very legal. So know what you're signing. I say that as an attorney who really doesn't read things, who doesn't read terms of service and stuff. But you usually are signing things away. So just be aware of those fake sports. They can do a lot of damage.
So I've prepared a bunch of those liability releases for Scout events because you want to describe the risk that's going to happen so parents can understand, or any participant can understand, okay, you're going to go do zip lining, and being able to say, if you fall out of the chair, because you're not hooked in correctly or whatever, like, here's everything bad that can happen. So you need to be able to adequately describe risk, but you also don't want to scare the hell out of people so they don't want to participate and make it sound like, that there could be gross negligence and too bad if your kid dies. So like, you don't want to come across as glib with, like, yeah, your kid's going to get into a catapult and we're going to launch him into a brick wall and you can't sue us. No, like, that's not what's going to happen here. So it's that fine line of adequately being able to describe the activity, associated risks, and the types of harms that can happen if you get hurt. Those are kind of the baseline requirements for a liability release. And I'm sure Clint, who fought Thanos, is looking at this going like, you got to be kidding me. I just need the costume back. So let's.
Third part, when he said, I fought Thanos. This is what it's come to. And he fought Thanos. But did he fight Thanos, or did he just run a gauntlet and like fight off Thanos's like arm? Engage with Thanos at all. So, himself up a little bit there.
Yeah,
But yeah.
he did a lot, you know, and he took on Nebula and lived to tell the tale. So, but anywho, let's get into the next issue of impersonating a firefighter. You can't impersonate public employees like that. So taking the jacket and just kind of blending in, well, great spycraft, not okay. Firemen aren't supposed to take articles from a crime scene, so like that's also a no-no. It's not a shopping spree. And then we find toys, which really did pull at my heartstrings. And God, I miss those. Stephen, let's talk about the tracksuit gang squatting at the
Yeah,
KB Toys because
yeah.
they can't find supervillain layers anymore.
Exactly. As far as supervillain lairs go, that was pretty rad. Like I'm a big toy fan, and I will say that again with the personal connections, I was a KB Toys employee in the early 90s in a mall in southwestern Ohio. And random Marvel connection. At the time, one of the biggest toys that we were selling was a Venom action figure that you would press a button and it would say things. And so when one of the sayings was I want to eat your brain. And so being the mature college students we would chase each other around the store with that toy. But anyway, yeah, KB Toy Stores, I saw the branding of it, and it made me wonder whether the Tracksuit Mafia had acquired title to that warehouse or store by adverse possession, which, as every first-year law student knows, is the legal mechanism by which a party acquires title. And so New York Real Property Actions and Proceedings, Section 501, defines adverse possession in New York and requires occupancy for 10 years and with an adverse claim of right that's open and notorious, continuous, exclusive, and actual. So it seemed like the Tracksuit Mafia was pretty exclusive and actual in their occupation. It's hard to know if it was continuous, but notably, in terms of timing, KB Toys went bankrupt in 2009. And given that there are still toys on the shelves and branding in the store, it seems like it's been abandoned since then. So assuming that Hawkeye, we said that Hawkeye takes place in 2023. So if Maya's dad had moved in sort of within a couple years of that KB toy store going defunct, they may have clocked the requisite time for New York property law. But the tricky thing would be to show that their occupation was open and notorious, because they sort of, as they're abandoning it, they say that the lair has been compromised. So it seems like they were maybe there in secret, so they weren't occupying it in a way that would give notice to the owner that they were occupying it. So I'm a fan of toys, so I can see the appeal of living in a toy warehouse, even if it was abandoned and creepy like that. But it seems unlikely that they acquired title to it.
Well, you also then get the public policy argument that you don't want the crime families adversely possessing their supervillain layers because it's like you don't get to commit crimes. This wasn't like a homeless encampment that now acquired title. It was a criminal operation that did business as a moving company as a front for their illegal activities for trust a bro. And in this case, you shouldn't.
Right. Trust a bro. That branding is so funny.
The writers clearly had lots of fun with this. So we see Echo as a child, and I am super curious who Uncle is, because part of me really wants it to be Fisk, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's Jake. But
It has to be this. I mean, I am a huge Vincent D'Onofrio fan. I sit from the days of Criminal Intent, like that was my show, and you can hear that's his laugh. That's his laugh. When Uncle comes to grab her by the cheek, D'Onofrio's laugh, and if they are playing me for a fool, I'm going to be very upset. But Cufflinks, well-dressed dude whose footsteps are heavier. emotional kind of workings, yeah, it's definitely.
So I paused the cheek pinch to see if we could see a French cuff with cufflinks, and we can't. The only thing we can see is the jacket sleeve. So I was, but it would make sense if that's Uncle with his aggressive redevelopment plans. And we do see his hotel that he's at in one of the scenes, but he should still be in prison. So I don't know where it's going to go, but it would make lots of sense if it was him. That said, we get public education rights for a child who's deaf. And Stephen, can you walk us through that?
Yeah, totally. Again, personal connection. My first job out of law school was working at a disability rights organization, and I worked with students with disabilities. So like all of this is like Hawkeye is like my show. So yes, that it's really distressing for me to see that, because she was being treated unlawfully by her school. She was Maya was certainly a student with a disability. She has an impairment that substantially impairs a major life activity, which is hearing. It appears from sort of her perspective is that she can't hear. She can hear very little, so she probably qualifies as fully deaf, not just hard of hearing. So the federal law, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504, and the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act both require the state or public schools to provide FAPE, which stands for Free Appropriate Public Education, in the least restrictive environment. So the federal law requires the public schools to provide the kind of interpretation that would allow Maya to access the educational opportunities on a same level playing field as her peers. So the fact that they weren't providing interpretation in a regular classroom or providing the least restrictive sort of special education environment for her to access the public education is a clear violation of federal law. But then I also looked into it, and it turns out that New York State actually has sort of more protections for students with disabilities than federal law, of course, which is always the floor. And in New York State, they provide tuition, room, and board for deaf students to attend state-operated schools for deaf students or private schools for students with disabilities, and that's in their education law starting at about Section 4204. So that I was really distressed to hear that, the father says that they couldn't afford it, which in New York State that shouldn't have been a barrier to them. So obviously the plot device there is to demonstrate that despite her inability to access the education, she was still a really high achiever and was still able to accomplish the assessments in her classroom. But she shouldn't have had to do that on her own. She shouldn't have had to self-compensate like that. She should have had access with an interpreter.
And again, this does seem to be your show. That brings us to echoes. At least the first third of it is one take. That's incredible. Like the Daredevil hallway fight from set a really high bar, but they did a car chase. Well done. I mean, just well done. I mean, somebody was in the back seat doing 360 and driving. So hats off to them for
and I
really.
I think what's really cool that have interrupted take in Loki when they're running through the planet Hensilti. That's not actually an actual long interrupted take, right? Because if you look closely, you can see where it's made to look like it, but you can see where the shots are kind of spaced together. You don't see the cuts until later on in the chase scene, because you can even see like the interior of the car when it's turning. And normally you don't see that in a scene like that. So it's an actual, kudos to their camera people and their director for putting that all together, because it is an actual interrupted shot.
There isn't a cut until she fires the arrow, and it's like, wow. So again, it's a long chase scene before they actually have a cut, and like that was just super cool. Now so he steals a car. So we get a necessity defense issue there because he needed to get away from the gang and they were stealing the gang member's car. So problematic, but defendable. When you get into armed conflict, like we're now, there's self-defense is at issue, but, and they are trying to retreat. So that's at play. So they're not, we will park and fire away. But they are trying to get away the entire time. But there would have to be a good necessity defense for the reckless driving. Boy, there's a lot of, because you're not supposed to be driving backwards at high speeds in an arrow fight versus guns. So there's just so much there, in addition to taking out street lights with acid arrows. So there's all kinds of wrong, but it's so awesome.
And they were on the Manhattan Bridge, right? Is that, I think?
I'm not, Gabby, you're the East Coaster. Can you help us with that?
I believe so, like 90% sure. It actually looked a bit like, it's obviously not the Brooklyn Bridge, but it's the other one. Yeah, it was definitely interesting. I think that's another element of this show. Is it's clearly grounded in New York. Like whoever, normally you see some New York films where this is New York. This is, from, like you said, Stephen, slushy streets to the, some of the weird billboards are placed. That is classic. The trains and everything is very accurate. Although the fact that they're able to drive that way, they did not do any damage to like major cars. I mean, there's some that like they're not smashing through cars, which this must be like midday on a day in New York. Because if you've driven through New York, usually it's kind of a pain to drive through, to drive the city. Although I usually drive in the city as opposed to taking the train. So, yeah.
It had to be filmed, during COVID. So maybe that made it easier. So
they're not wearing masks, though. It is a requirement, at least at maybe 2023. It's not no longer a requirement to wear masks and stuff. So who knows? So
we shall see. So that was pretty cool. Like that's all I gotta say. We have they escaped the tracksuits by doing an arrow trick saw in the first Avengers film, and then riding a train. Stephen, I think you recognized an issue with the train spotting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the B and D trains that go underneath the Manhattan Bridge like that, that the tracks below the deck, the automobile deck. But yeah, anyone who's lived in a big city or in a city that has sort of underground public transportation like that has seen like the big notices about how it's unlawful to be on the tracks, that it's a matter of trespass because of the danger that's involved with being exposed to sort of train operations. So I'm sure that Clint and Kate's jumping on the top of a train, which would be considered sort of a non-public area of the public transit system, probably implicates some at least civil, probably some criminal trespass liability there, although it was, but again, maybe a necessity defense if they were doing that to avoid injury or death. So yeah, but yeah, trains are highly off limits unless you're actually in the car.
yeah. I don't know if they went through the turnstile to pay the fees. Obviously, they would have had to kind of slide over. We see the platform, so they must have slid over and entered the car once it opened.
Oh my gosh, they're fair jumpers.
Like 99% sure they did not pay a fee, so they are kind of in violation of how that if you live somewhere with public transit, chances are you like slid by without, sometimes, especially places like Boston, don't have necessarily the turnstiles that they do in New York, other types of that kind of barrier. But as an Avenger, we saw him get a free meal, so he may like get a clean slate and be like, sure, Mr. Barton, like you can ride the New York City subways for free. You saved us, so you have kind of unlimited pass to ride the subways. So yeah, that's definitely another violation there.
You saved the universe and you saved New York and probably a bunch of other things we don't know about. You're good. You're good.
That's
That's a problem. And the fact that that doesn't go away, they're not doing a mulligan on his 5-year murder spree as part of the plot is great. With the legal analysis aside, I think it's fair that we talk about just the reactions of there is so much character development with this that we see Clint just trying to be a dad, and he's grateful to have his family back after 5 years of them being dead. They come back. He just wants to be with his kids, be with his wife. The fact that his wife has a healthy relationship with each other, that he told her about Ronan, so she knows about that, and that would technically be protected by the marital privilege, is cool. But it's not some secret that he didn't tell his wife about. And they communicate, and she understands what he does. Because again, I think saving the universe, it's not like some icy relationship with like, oh, you have to go save lives again. Like it's not like some, she doesn't end a conversation with fine. It's they're very understanding, and he just wants to be with his wife and kids.
It's very interesting, like her knowledge of his strategy too, because they discuss, the kind of strategy he's going to take. One thing I saw online, which would be super cool, is that they may retcon her as Mockingbird, obviously played by the actress, but that they may retcon her or maybe use the title of Blackbird as a kind of 7 title within S.H.I.E.L.D., and that she's a retired S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, which is why she has this knowledge and is more kind of okay with him and very kind of on board. So that'd be cool to see. I think that would be interesting. I don't know, for a first season of Hawkeye, definitely a second season to explore more of her background.
Yeah, good call. And that is an interesting observation. I like the fact he's a good dad. And too often in pop culture, we see dads just fail. And Dune, we saw Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto being the abnormally emotionally available space dad, and then Hawkeye being a good dad. It's like, could this be a trend? Could we actually just see healthy marriages with good dads? That would be delightful for. Instead of just like, yeah, they all screw up, they're emotionally unavailable, and they're never there for their kids. The kids understand what dad does. Dad wants to be with them. More of that. And then there's Kate, who's got her own arc and trauma of seeing her dad die or killed, and the impact of Hawkeye saving her life. And the impact that has on her, and like being a black belt at age 15 and being highly competitive because she just wants to be the next Hawkeye. So this is good stuff. Other observations?
I'm just excited for the representation. I mean, we've talked about this in Star Wars as far as Latino representation, but like to see the disabled representation, they have Kazi as a translator at some points. Even that is very realistic, that he's not consistently translating for her. And you know, just the her obviously as a Native American character, a deaf character, and also Hawkeye as a deaf Avenger. Like to have Hawkeye, I mean, Hawkeye is canonically deaf in the comics, but to have him be deaf here is like, and that because obviously I'm not sure if they give kind of a backstory of his deafness or if it's just kind of a thing that he has. But here to see his deafness be a result of being an Avenger, like the whole, you know, he explains why, you know, and Kate asks him about the hearing aid, you know, you see all the times he got like whacked and, you know, knocked on the ground and, you know, flying through windows, and it takes its toll. Like people are human, and to see that, and I find it interesting that, you know, he and Echo have an exchange of, you know, whether he's hard of hearing or completely deaf. And she actually suggests for him that he'd be better off without the hearing aid. And you see that once he loses because he says he's hard of hearing, when he loses the hearing aid, you know, he's completely deaf. He cannot hear. So the toll that has taken is just, and the fact that like Echo, I'm like so hyped for Echo, you know, as a character with a prosthesis, as a disabled character who's deaf. And to me, like, I know we've seen this several times of characters getting their comic book accurate costume. We saw Kate draw it for Clint, his comic book accurate costume. We know that they're probably going to get it in the. I apologize, can hear my cat in the background. No, to see, you know, because we've seen like Scarlet Witch getting her comic book accurate, etc. But to see Echo's comic book accurate look be her father's bloody handprint was so good, so good. It was just like it made me so happy. I think, you know, it was just such a kind of powerful moment because it's been used as more of like a nod and whatever, but that actually had kind of story significance to it, which was really powerful. And it's this kind of mark that has stayed with her, that even though it's no longer on her face as it is with her character, it is something that has stayed with her. So yeah, I'm so excited. She's getting her off series, so like it's good. I'm hyped for Echo.
Yeah. I was just going to add that in terms of the representation of disability, it really struck me when I saw Eternals that sort of Thena's story is kind of a real clear allegory for someone who has sort of acquires some sort of disability later in life, either through like aging or maybe like dementia, and sort of other psychological disabilities or impairments. And the fact that her and Gilgamesh's story is so positive and so warm and loving, I thought that was a really great allegory, although it's not a realistic disability like Clinton and Echo's deafness. But I really am glad to see that Marvel is kind of grappling with those sort of issues.
Agreed. And it's good storytelling. So like that's the other part of it, that we see Avengers, and like so Hawkeye has his moments there, but like it's really hard to get in-depth character moments when you're trying to do an overarching story. Unless you just focus on 2 or 3 characters in a movie, it's really hard for everyone to get their due. And this is just good in being able to see the dad element, see the husband element, see the mentorship with Kate, Kate's own personal journey, even though she should have explained to Clint the importance of the butterscotch, that it was monogrammed. That was an important fact that for him to go, what? So butterscotch isn't a crime.
butterscotch are questionable. Just saying. If that's what your candy, questionable. Also, evil people grandmas have like candy just sitting in their house. That's just hard candy, not candy. Yeah.
Flag, yeah, big red flag.
That's monogrammed. I mean, it's a giant bowl of Jelly Bellies. That's welcoming, but that's just a little weird. Um, but that's a good clue, and she should have articulated that to him to bring him on board for what the hell are you talking about? So I'm optimistic for episode 4 to see if this is going to be, a nice hand-to-hand combat fight, or what happens with Clint versus Jake, who's clearly highly skilled. So, be a good time. With that, any other closing thoughts before we close out our epic 3-episode intro talk?
So great. I'm so excited about the show. Thank you for having me.
Well, we'll be back next week. And, so more to come, everybody. So everyone, continue to stay safe, stay healthy, and above all else, stay geeky. Take care.